I buried my 8-year-old son, John, alone under the unforgiving Savannah sun. The air was suffocating thick with humidity, like trying to breathe through a damp towel. Sweat clung to my back as I stood in my black dress, staring at the cemetery gates, waiting for anyone to show up. But there was nothing. No family, no friends. Just me and the scorching silence of a grave that felt far too small. I told myself they must have been stuck in traffic, or maybe there was a flight delay. I kept making excuses for them until the first shovel full of dirt hit the casket. Then my phone buzzed. I pulled it from my purse, half expecting an apology. But no, it was a message from my mother, not a text, but a link to a Zillow listing. A sprawling 5-bedroom estate priced at $1.5 million, the exact amount of my son's life insurance and trust fund combined. While I was laying my child to rest, my family wasn't grieving. They were shopping. I stood there, tears blurring my vision, not knowing whether to scream or just walk away. In that moment, I understood this wasn't just a loss. This was a betrayal, and it would change everything. I drove home that day in a fog, the air conditioning in my old sedan blasting against the sweat that had dried on my skin. The back seat was cluttered with the flower arrangements from the service, their heavy scent of white lilies suffocating me, like a reminder that the world was over. I felt like I was driving through the afterlife, each mile a weight on my shoulders. The flowers, so beautiful and pristine, seemed to mock me with their purity. The smell of them made my stomach turn, and yet I couldn't escape it. It was everywhere, clinging to me, suffocating my thoughts. I just wanted it to stop, but nothing ever stops. Not when you've buried your child and the world goes on without you. When I unlocked the door to my apartment, the silence was deafening. The quiet was supposed to be peaceful, wasn't it? But all I could hear was the absence, the echo of footsteps that would never be there again. I walked into the kitchen, my eyes drifting over to the empty chair where John used to sit for breakfast, his small legs swinging back and forth under the table. The sight of that empty space hit me like a brick to the chest. I waited for the breakdown. I waited for the sobs, the raw, primal grief to swallow me whole. But it didn't come. Instead, a strange cold clarity settled over me, starting at the base of my spine and spreading out like ice. It was like I had finally woken up from a nightmare. Suddenly everything was sharp, clear. The edges of the world were defined crisp in high definition. I opened my laptop. I needed to know. I needed to understand what had happened, what had gone wrong. Why had they let me stand there alone, burying my son while they did nothing? I logged into the florist website, the one my mother had used every year for birthdays and anniversaries. I knew her password, of course. I had always been the one who ordered the gifts she took credit for. I found the order for the funeral spray, the one they'd sent me in place of their presents. There it was, the date stamp 14 days ago. They had known. They had known 2 weeks before my son died that they wouldn't be there for me, that they wouldn't stand beside me as I buried him. It wasn't a last-minute emergency. It wasn't traffic. It wasn't a sudden illness. They had planned their absence. They had scheduled it like an appointment, like a dentist visit. My hands shook as I stared at the screen. I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred, the tears threatening to spill, but I didn't let them. I wasn't going to cry anymore. Not for them. Not for a family that couldn't even be bothered to show up when their own flesh and blood was suffering. This was the moment when I realized they weren't my family. They were strangers, and they had never cared for me. Not really. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the laptop across the room. I just sat there staring at the cold, hard evidence of their indifference. I thought I had been prepared for this. I thought I knew the depth of their neglect, but I hadn't known. Not until this moment. The last shred of hope I had been holding on to, the hope that maybe, just maybe, my mother loved me, that my father wanted to protect me, it snapped. Like a thread breaking in the wind, it was gone, and all that was left was cold, hard clarity. I closed the laptop, but the anger inside me burned brighter than ever. They thought they could break me. They thought grief had made me weak, that I would be easy to manipulate, to mold into whatever they wanted. They were wrong, and I was going to make them pay for what they had done to me. But first, I needed to understand the full extent of their betrayal. So I turned to the one thing I had always been able to control: money. I logged into my banking portal, and there it was, a joint credit card I had shared with my sister Destiny. She had been an authorized user for years. She had asked me to help her build credit, and like an idiot, I had done it. I scrolled through the transactions. The first entry that caught my eye was from the day I had been at the funeral home, picking out a casket. Destiny had spent $400 at a Sephora in Atlanta. While I was planning my son's final goodbye, she was buying makeup. And that wasn't the only one. While I was writing John's eulogy, she had dropped $200 at a sushi restaurant. I clicked remove authorized user, my fingers trembling as I confirmed the action. The card was dead. My sister was no longer tied to me. And that was just the beginning. The realization settled in deeper than I expected. Each click, each action I took in that moment felt more like a statement, a declaration to the universe that I wasn't going to be their punching bag anymore. My mother, my father, my sister, they had trained me to believe that I owed them everything, that my worth was measured by how much I could give. That's what they'd made me feel all these years, hadn't they? But I wasn't going to play along anymore. I opened the smart home app for the family cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains, a place I had bought with the settlement from my divorce. It was supposed to be a sanctuary, a haven for me and John to get away to see snow and breathe in clean air. But my family had turned it into their weekend getaway. They used it to entertain their friends while I footed the bill for property taxes. It had always been my responsibility, but not anymore. I selected the digital lock and I changed the access code. I deleted my father's code. I deleted my mother's code. I deleted Destiny's code. One by one, the digital ties that bound me to them were severed. It wasn't just the cabin. It wasn't just the house or the property taxes. It was everything. Every dollar I had ever sent them, every loan, every favor, every sacrifice I had made in their name. I was cutting it all off, piece by piece. I wasn't going to let them use me anymore. For years, I had played the dutiful daughter, the helpful sister. I had been the one they turned to when they needed something. Whether it was money to cover bills they should have paid themselves, or emotional support when they made another mess of their lives. And all the while I had let myself be manipulated. They made me believe that I was the only one who could fix things, that I was the one who had to take responsibility for their failures. And when I was struggling, when I needed them most, they hadn't been there. Not when my son died, not when I was standing alone holding the weight of the world in my hands. I thought back to everything they had said to me over the years. The comments that made me feel small, insignificant, like I wasn't good enough. You play with your coloring books, my mother had said to me just a week ago when I was struggling to organize a funeral. You're just not equipped for the real world, Sarah. Coloring books. That's what she had called my career, my art, my work. It was a thing that had paid her mortgage when she forgot to send the check. But she had never appreciated it. She had always dismissed it, belittled it. Just like she belittled me and my father. He had never even said thank you. When I paid off their second mortgage, he hadn't offered a single word of gratitude. No, he had just nodded and said, "Good girl, at least you're making yourself useful." That's what they wanted from me, to be useful, to be their provider. But they never saw me as a person. They saw me as a tool, a means to an end. And destiny. She had been the same. Always taking, never giving. I had paid for her flights, her trips, her mistakes. I had helped her build her brand while she ignored, used me, and didn't even acknowledge my presence. I was always the one doing the heavy lifting while she took the credit. She had spent hundreds of dollars on herself while I was at my son's funeral. Yet, she had the nerve to act like she was the one who had been wronged. I was done with her. So, I clicked through the apps on my phone, each click a little louder than the last, each one carving a deeper line into the fabric of the life they had woven around me. I cut off their access to everything, the house, the accounts, the cards. I severed their hold over me, and I felt something shift inside of me. It was like a weight lifting off my chest. A weight I hadn't even realized was there until it was gone. But it wasn't just the financial ties I was cutting. I was severing the emotional ones too. The ones they had wrapped around me like chains that I had never noticed until now. The years of manipulation, the emotional blackmail. They had made me feel guilty for every single thing I did for myself. Every time I tried to take a step forward, they pulled me back with a string of criticisms disguised as concern. But now I could see it all for what it was. Control. They had used me for their own benefit, and I had let them. I had allowed them to drain me of everything, my time, my money, my energy, because I was too afraid to say no. Too afraid to disappoint them, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I closed the apps, my mind racing with everything I had just done. And I realized something else too. They had always thought I was weak, that grief had broken me, but it hadn't. No. Grief had done something else. It had burned away everything that wasn't essential, and what was left me, stronger, clearer, unshakable. I stood up from the chair, my fingers still trembling from the weight of what I had just done. But there was no regret. There was no doubt. I had taken control back. And now I was going to make them pay for what they had done. Not with vengeance, not with rage, but with the quiet strength of someone who had finally learned to stand up for herself. I pulled up the spreadsheet I had hidden away in a folder deep in my hard drive. It was called The Ledger, and I had created it years ago, right after my father retired early and decided that he deserved a break. I had thought it was just a way to keep track of all the money I had sent them, but now I saw it for what it really was, a record of my own complicity in their manipulation. Row 1, $96,000. That was the total I had paid toward their second mortgage. Every month, without fail, $2,000 left my account and went into theirs. I remembered the first time I sent it. My mother had called me in tears, telling me they were about to lose the house. "We sacrificed everything for you girls," she had sobbed, "and now we have nothing." I had just landed my first major contract, illustrating a rare plant guide for a university press. I felt rich, but I also felt guilty. I didn't want to see my parents lose their house, so I paid. When I told them, my father didn't even say thank you. He just nodded and said, "Good girl. At least you're making yourself useful." Useful. That was what they had always called me. My usefulness was the only thing I was valued for. I had paid their bills, covered their debts, and cleaned up their messes time and time again. And every time I felt like I was drowning just a little bit more. But I didn't care. I thought I had to. They had made me believe that I was the only one who could save them, that I was the one who had to take responsibility for their failures. Row 12, the influencer trip. Destiny had wanted to go to Tulum for her birthday to build her brand. She couldn't afford the flight, so my mother cornered me at Sunday dinner. "Your sister is so talented, Sarah," she had said, her voice full of that same fake sympathy. "She just needs a break. You have savings. Don't be selfish." Selfish. That was the word they always used whenever I tried to keep something for myself, whenever I tried to say no. So, I paid for the flight. Destiny posted 30 photos from that trip. I wasn't tagged in a single one. I had bought her the opportunity, and she had acted like I didn't even exist. Row 24, the car accident. Destiny had totaled her BMW while texting, and my father had co-signed the loan. He was panicking about his credit score, so I paid the $500 deductible. It wasn't just the money, it was the way they had trained me to feel. Like I had no choice. Like I had to fix everything. And every time I did, they made me feel invisible. They starved me of affection for weeks, months, making me believe that if I just did more, if I just gave a little more, maybe they would love me. Maybe things would be different. But they never were. They never changed, and neither did I. I kept paying, kept sacrificing, kept putting their needs above my own. I kept believing that maybe, just maybe if I could prove I was enough, they would finally see me for who I was. Not just the person who bailed them out, but someone who deserved love and respect in return. But I was wrong. I kept scrolling through the ledger, each entry, each amount, a reminder of everything I had given. The shame I had felt for so long, the guilt that had eaten away at me for not being enough evaporated. It wasn't shame anymore. It was anger. It was fuel. All those years of being used, all those years of being treated like I was nothing more than a tool for their convenience, now it was clear to me. I wasn't their savior. I was their hostage. And now it was time to let go. I closed the spreadsheet and leaned back in my chair. The weight of everything I had done for them, the years of self-sacrifice, the money, the energy, the emotional toll, suddenly felt like a mountain that had been lifted from my chest. I had spent my life building them a safety net, stitching it together with my own money and self-worth. And now I was going to cut the ropes and watch them fall. The knock came at 2:00 in the afternoon, heavy and forceful like a warning. It wasn't the polite kind of knock you expect from family, but a loud, entitled pounding that shook the doorframe. I peeked through the peephole and saw my parents standing there as though they had every right to invade my space. Without a word, I unlocked the deadbolt, but before I could even say, "Hello," my father barged past me, the heat of the savannah afternoon, following him in like a wave. He didn't even look at me as he marched straight into the kitchen. He opened the fridge, started pulling things out. "Expired?" he muttered, tossing a carton of milk into the trash. "Wilted," he said, throwing away a bag of spinach. It wasn't a wellness check, it was a raid. It felt like he was searching for something, building a case against me. He was scrutinizing my life, showing me how far I'd fallen in his eyes. My mother stood in the hallway staring at the walls where I'd hung my latest artwork, intricate watercolors of decaying magnolias. It was art, but to her it wasn't. "It's so dark in here, Sarah," she said, her voice trembling with that practiced fake concern. "These drawings, they're obsessive. It's not healthy." I crossed my arms, trying to remain calm, but the anger was bubbling up inside me. I couldn't believe this was happening. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice flat. Her response was chillingly calm. "We want to save you." I felt a cold shiver down my spine. It wasn't help they were offering. It was control. "We spoke to a specialist. He agrees. You're showing signs of a psychotic break. The isolation, the aggression cutting off your sister." She pulled a thick stack of papers from her handbag and slapped them down on the coffee table. "It's a voluntary conservatorship," she said. "Just for the financial side. We'll manage John's trust. You don't have to worry about anything." I stared at the papers. Everything clicked. They didn't care about me. They didn't want to help. They wanted control. If I didn't sign, my father slammed the fridge door shut and turned to face me. "Then we call the authorities," he said coldly. "We file for an involuntary 5150 hold. We tell them you're a danger to yourself." My stomach dropped. They had forged evidence-fake emails to Destiny. They had planned this all along. I looked at my mother, who stood there watching me with an eerie calm. They had manipulated me for so long, but now it was clear. They weren't saving me. They were trying to steal everything I had left. I wasn't going to let them. Not this time. I couldn't let them take what was mine. They had underestimated me, thought I was broken beyond repair, but they didn't know what they had created. My fury wasn't blind. It was focused. It was controlled. I wasn't going to lash out recklessly. I was going to hit them where it hurt, where they never saw it coming. The day they left, thinking they had cornered me, I did what they never expected. I called Eric. Eric's office wasn't your typical law firm. It felt more like a bunker, cold and sterile, with servers humming along one wall, and Kelly, my late husband's aunt, sitting at the head of the table, her eyes sharp, unfeeling, and completely unsentimental. Eric slid a tablet across the table to me. "We found why they're desperate," he said, voice low. "It wasn't just debt. There's a ledger from an illegal gambling ring in Atlanta. Destiny's name is everywhere. She owes $400,000. Kelly flipped open a folder showing more damning evidence. "Your parents co-signed. These aren't banks. These are loan sharks. They have 48 hours before it gets violent." Everything clicked into place. The panic, the threats, the sudden concern for me. It wasn't about saving me. It was about getting their hands on my son's trust fund before they were destroyed. They needed that money, and they were willing to destroy me to get it. Kelly leaned forward, her voice cold and calm. "They'll do anything to get their hands on it, but now they've made a mistake." I felt a strange calm wash over me. I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to let them take the last thing I had, left the legacy of my son. But I was going to make sure they paid for their deceit. I made my decision. I picked up my phone and dialed Eric. It was time to turn the tables. At my parents' house, I played the part of the defeated daughter perfectly. I gave them what they wanted, what they thought was their victory. I transferred $450,000, the exact amount they'd been counting on. They toasted to their success, completely unaware of the trap I had set. The moment of triumph was so subtle, so calculated, that it almost felt anticlimactic. I watched them smiling, thinking they had won, but their celebration was short-lived. My father's phone rang and his face went pale as he whispered into the receiver, "All our accounts are frozen." The IRS, the mob. They were both in play now. I had filed a whistleblower report flagging their gambling ring and their illegal activities. The money they had planned to steal was the same money that had triggered a federal hold. The IRS froze their accounts before they could get a single penny. Destiny screamed. My father swore. My mother, ever the actress, tried to regain composure, but it was too late. They were trapped, caught in their own web of lies and greed. It was their turn to fall, and I was the one who had orchestrated it. I walked away from that day with a quiet sense of satisfaction. They had destroyed themselves. I had done nothing but stand firm and let the truth catch up with them. The family I had spent so many years trying to please, trying to save, was now crumbling under the weight of their own corruption. As the dust settled, I found myself standing in the ruins of everything they had tried to take from me. My son's trust fund was intact, untouched by their greed, and with it, I began to rebuild. I used that money to create the John Morgan Astronomy Scholarship, something that would honor my son's memory. I had stopped carrying my family. I hadn't lost them. I had let them go. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about getting even. It was about finding my own peace, about making sure the love I had given so freely to the wrong people was now being used for something good. I had taken the first step toward healing. The road wasn't easy, but for the first time I felt free. And that, in the end, was the greatest victory of all. It's strange, isn't it? How the people we love the most can sometimes be the ones who hurt us the most. For so many years, I thought I had to carry my family, fix their mistakes, and sacrifice myself for their sake. But in the end, it wasn't about them, it was about me. I learned that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let go, even when it feels like the hardest thing in the world. When I look back, I see a woman who was broken, lost in the middle of a storm of manipulation and betrayal. But now I see someone who's rebuilt herself from the ground up. I've found peace, and I've learned to live on my own terms. And I'm not afraid to put myself first anymore. The road hasn't been easy, and I don't think it ever will be. But that's okay. It's part of the journey, right? I'm still healing, still growing, and I know there's so much more ahead of me. I've learned that strength isn't about never falling. It's about picking yourself back up, no matter how many times it takes. Thanks for listening to my story. It's not an easy one to tell, but I hope it resonates with someone out there. If you've ever had to let go of something or someone you thought you couldn't live without, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. And hey, if you like the story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Take care. And remember, you're never as alone as you think.